Welcome in, everybody. Today we're diving deep into the life and legacy of, well, Jimmy Carter, America's 39th president. He just passed away at 100 years old, and you've given me quite the collection of articles. We've got stuff from, well, the big names like the New York Times, Fox News, The Guardian, even some international perspectives, The Economist, Die Zeit, Il Sol 24 Or, a lot to dig into. So let's get started and see what made Carter, well, such a fascinating guy, such a unique figure in American history, really.
When I look at all this, it really strikes me how Carter's early life, way back in rural Georgia, how that really might have shaped his whole political career.
Hmm. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, think about it. I mean, this isn't some guy born into like a political dynasty or anything.
Mm.
He was a peanut farmer first,
Mm.
naval officer, and then, governor of Georgia. All of those experiences, especially I'd say growing up, during the Depression in the rural South, I think that probably gave him a real understanding of what everyday people were going through, what their struggles were.
Yeah, I guess that makes you wonder, if that's part of what helped him connect with voters back in 1976. After Watergate, after Vietnam, the nation was kind of disillusioned. People were really looking for a leader who seemed honest, someone relatable.
Right, and that's where his "I'll never lie to you" pledge comes in.
Yeah.
I mean, that was more than just a campaign slogan, It reflected something deeper. It reflected a real deep-seated belief in honesty, transparency,
Mm.
which, it resonated with people, especially voters who were just tired of all the political maneuvering.
But that same sincerity, I mean, the thing that drew people to him,
Okay.
it also kind of had its downsides, right? Some people felt like he was, I don't know, maybe a little too idealistic, especially when it came to like the world stage.
Yeah, you're right. You're hitting on, I think, a key tension that runs through his whole career. Like, take his decision to walk from the Capitol to the White House after his inauguration, I mean.
Yeah.
That was a powerful symbol of humility. But that same down-to-earth style, sometimes it came across as, I don't know, maybe lacking a little presidential gravitas.
Yeah, like when he wore that cardigan for his televised fireside chat, talking about the energy crisis, urging Americans to conserve. Remember that? I mean, some people, they saw it as relatable, but, for a president facing a national crisis, maybe a little too casual.
Exactly, exactly. And, that actually brings us to the Camp David Accords, arguably, his greatest achievement, bringing Egypt and Israel together, a peace agreement. But even there, his approach, it was kind of unconventional.
Yeah, I remember reading that he basically secluded himself.
Right.
With Anwar Sadat, Menachem begin at Camp David for 13 days, acting as a mediator. He even handwrote drafts of the agreement. Most presidents, they would have left that to the diplomats.
Yeah. He was deeply involved, invested in the whole process. And, while the Camp David Accords were, of course, a major diplomatic win, it also shows his tendency to be personally involved, even in these really delicate negotiations. It worked out in this case, but it shows a style of governing that wasn't always, effective.
That's a good point. And then you have the Panama Canal Treaties, another complicated diplomatic achievement. But returning control of the canal to Panama, man, that was hugely controversial. A lot of people, they accused Carter of just, giving away a vital American asset.
He saw it as a matter of principle, right? Righting a historic wrong,
Yeah.
acknowledging Panama's, sovereignty. It was a risk, yeah. But he thought it was the right thing to do, even if it was going to cost him politically.
It seems like he really operated on like this strong moral compass, and that kind of guided his decisions on human rights and foreign policy too. He spoke out against dictatorships, authoritarian regimes, even when it made things a little awkward with allies.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid to stand up for what he believed in, even when it was, well, unpopular. That commitment to human rights, that was at the core of how he saw the world. And it would continue to drive him,
Yeah.
long after he left the White House.
But let's be real, his presidency, it wasn't all roses. The energy crisis, the Iran hostage crisis, those events, they really hurt his image. They made him look, well, weak in a lot of Americans' eyes.
That's true. The energy crisis especially, that had a big impact on the country's, on the nation's psyche, people waiting in these long gas lines, prices were skyrocketing.
Yeah.
There was this feeling of, I don't know, helplessness, frustration.
It's interesting that he decided to go on TV to address the nation. He talked about a crisis of confidence facing America. He urged people to conserve energy, embrace a simpler lifestyle.
That was a bold move. Some people, they praised him for his honesty. But a lot of others, they criticized him for being too pessimistic, even blaming, the American people for the country's problems.
And then you've got the Iran hostage crisis. Dragged on for, man, 444 days. And in the end, it contributed to his defeat
Yeah.
in the 1980 election.
The image of those blindfolded hostages paraded in front of the cameras, I mean, it became the symbol, of America, well, impotence on the world stage. Carter
Yeah.
worked so hard, tirelessly behind the scenes to get them released. But the public, they just saw him as indecisive, ineffective. It's a stark reminder of how things outside your control can just completely overshadow even the most well-intentioned efforts.
Yeah, you can see how all of that, the hostage crisis, the struggling economy, the sense that America had lost its way, all that led to his defeat. But it's fascinating how those setbacks, they seem to have fueled his work after he left office.
Yeah, almost like being knocked down in the political arena. It gave him this new energy. He didn't, retreat into bitterness or resentment. He channeled all of that energy into, humanitarian work, building houses with Habitat for Humanity, monitoring elections around the world, fighting diseases like guinea worm.
Yeah, he really redefined what it meant to be a former president. Instead of just fading away, he stepped onto a bigger stage. He became like this global advocate for peace, for human rights, for social justice.
Right, and it's important to remember it wasn't just symbolic. He was out there. He was hammering nails.
Yeah.
Digging wells, mediating conflicts. He was involved in every little detail of these efforts. I mean, it was that commitment.
Yeah.
That ultimately led to him winning the Nobel Peace Prize back in 2002.
Yeah.
The committee, they specifically mentioned his, decades of work trying to find peaceful solutions to these international conflicts, advancing democracy, human rights, promoting, economic and social development.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? He wins this huge global recognition for peacemaking after a lot of people saw him as a failed president, partly because of the Iran hostage crisis.
Yeah, it really shows how it plays out, The Nobel Committee, they were looking at his whole career, not just one event, however big it might have seemed at the time. They recognized, his constant efforts trying to build bridges, even with people seen as enemies.
He didn't exactly shy away from controversy either. His book back in 2006, Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid, that really stirred things up. Some people, they accused him of being anti-Israel, even anti-Semitic, for criticizing, Israeli policies toward Palestinians.
It's important, I think, to remember the context. Carter was really committed to a two-state solution. He believed that peace, real lasting peace, would only come through mutual understanding, through respect, and he saw what was happening. In the occupied territories, he saw it as unjust. He argued it was like it mirrored apartheid in South Africa.
He was a really strong advocate for Palestinian self-determination, and, well, that definitely put him at odds with a lot of people in the pro-Israel community. But he also, he criticized Palestinian leadership, including Hamas, for using violence.
So he believed in dialogue, even with people who were considered enemies. He met with, Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO, when the U.S. government still considered it a terrorist organization. And later, he met with leaders of Hamas, which a lot of people, the Israeli government, even some people in the U.S., they really condemn that.
He was willing to be that lightning rod, to take the heat if it meant, moving the cause of peace forward. And look, some people, they might disagree with how he did things or with his, his analysis. But you can't deny his commitment, his unwavering commitment to finding a just solution, a lasting solution to the conflict.
Yeah, it reminds us that working for peace often means, taking unpopular stances.
Yeah.
Talking to people who have different views, even people who you might, disagree with on a fundamental level.
It makes me think about, with all this talk of peacemaking, human rights, it makes me think about the role of faith in Carter's life. He was a devout Southern Baptist.
Yep.
And he never shied away from talking about his beliefs, even when he was president.
His faith, it was central to who he was, to how he saw the world. It's what motivated him to teach Sunday school, even while he was president, which he kept doing for decades, even after leaving office. It was also a driving force
behind his commitment to social justice, to helping people who are less fortunate.
I read that he actually increased the number of black appointees to federal positions by quite a bit. And this was at a time when a lot of Southern Democrats, they were still struggling to fully embrace the civil rights movement. Yeah, he saw it as a moral imperative, living out his faith, promoting equality, opportunity for all people. And some people within the evangelical community, they criticized his views on things like women's rights, but he never wavered in his belief that his faith called him to work for a more just and compassionate society.
I'm also struck by how he never seemed to lose his sense of humor or his humility, even after becoming, the president. There are all these stories about him carrying his own luggage, flying commercial, even fixing like
Yeah.
a leaky toilet at the governor's mansion himself.
Yeah, it shows his down-to-earth nature, his belief that he was,
Yeah.
no better than anyone else, even though he held, this powerful position. And that humility, it let him connect with people from all walks of life. Whether he was building houses
Yeah.
with Habitat for Humanity or negotiating peace treaties with world leaders.
He was a real example of servant leadership. He saw being president and later, being a global citizen as an opportunity to use his platform, his influence, to serve others, to make a positive impact.
And it leads us to an interesting question, doesn't it? What will his most enduring legacy be? How will people remember him 100 years from now?
It's a good question to think about. Was it, helping to bring peace between Egypt and Israel, or all of his work for human rights? Or maybe it's just, the simple way he lived his life with integrity, with compassion, with this unwavering commitment to helping other people.
He was complex,
Yeah.
a man of contradictions, peanut farmer who became president, a peacemaker who was also, polarizing figure, a devout Christian who challenged how people traditionally interpreted his faith.
But one thing that's clear, in every story about his life, is this genuine desire to make the world a better place. He didn't always succeed. He made mistakes, but he never stopped trying. And I think that's a legacy worth celebrating. It's funny, isn't it? Like his presidency, a lot of people see it as a failure, but then his time after being president, widely admired. It makes you wonder if maybe his whole approach, maybe it was just better suited to life outside of Washington.
It's a good point. The very things that some people saw as weaknesses in a president,
Yeah.
like his idealism, his focus on morals, on principles over, political maneuvering, those became strengths. When he was free to do his own thing, he could be a more effective advocate
Yeah.
for human rights, for peace, when he wasn't bogged down. All the complexities of partisan politics, international diplomacy.
Right, and he could focus on issues that he really cared about, like getting rid of guinea worm disease. Now, it was a pretty obscure parasitic infection, but Carter, he saw it as a problem that could be solved, and he dedicated himself to it with the same, the same energy, the same tenacity that he brought to Camp David.
And it's important to point out, this wasn't just some symbolic effort. He and Rosalind, along with the Carter Center, they were there on the ground in Africa, working with local communities, implementing these strategies. Simple, but effective, like filtering drinking water.
Yeah, it shows what you can do with persistence, with focus. I mean, they managed to bring down the number of cases from millions in the 80s to just a handful today. That's amazing.
That's a legacy that will keep saving lives, improving health for generations to come. And it shows, Carter's belief that even these really tough problems, seemingly impossible to solve, they can be solved if you have the dedication, innovation, and the willingness to work with people right there on the ground.
And his work with Habitat for Humanity, that's another great example of that hands-on approach. He wasn't just, lending his name to the organization. He was out there swinging a hammer, building houses, right alongside the volunteers.
It was a way for him to live out his faith, to put his beliefs into action by helping people in need. And it also, it connected with...
it's connected with his upbringing in rural Georgia, where, self-reliance, community, those were really important values.
And speaking of his upbringing, it's so interesting how those early experiences, they really seem to shape his whole view of the world. Growing up on a farm during the Depression, that gave him this strong work ethic, a sense of a resourcefulness, and a real appreciation for the land. And then, going to the Naval Academy, that really reinforced those values. Discipline, service, the importance of knowledge. He was always reading his whole life, immersing himself in, all sorts of topics: history, theology, science, literature, you name it.
He was a lifelong learner, always trying to understand the world better. And you can see that curiosity in how he approached solving problems. He wasn't afraid to question conventional wisdom, to look at things from different angles, to find new and creative solutions.
It's one of the reasons he was so interested in nuclear disarmament. He saw the threat of nuclear war as the biggest issue facing humanity. And he believed that dialogue, talking to each other, even with your enemies, that was the key to finding a path to peace.
He even went to North Korea in '94
Yeah.
during a really tense time to try and negotiate, a peaceful solution to the nuclear crisis. It was a bold move, and look, it didn't ultimately stop North Korea from developing nuclear weapons, but it showed his commitment to diplomacy, his willingness to take risks for peace.
Which brings us back to, to his legacy. What will people remember most
Mm.
about Jimmy Carter? The presidency that didn't quite work out, the Nobel Peace Prize, all the humanitarian work.
I think it's all of that, but maybe even more than that. It's his character, his integrity, his humility, his unwavering belief in the good in people.
He showed us that it's possible to be a good person, a compassionate person, even in the world of politics. That you can stick to your values,
Yeah.
even when it's hard, even when it costs you.
And that even after setbacks, after disappointments, you can keep working for a
Yeah.
better world, to make a difference in people's lives.
He wasn't, perfect. He had flaws. He made mistakes, but he never stopped trying to live up to his ideals.
And that's something to aspire to.
It reminds us that we all have the power to make a difference, to leave the world, a little bit better than we found it. And that even when things are tough, we can choose to live with purpose, with compassion, with hope.
Jimmy Carter's life, it was a testament to that belief. He showed us that you can make a difference, you can leave a mark on the world, not through, power or position, but through simple acts of kindness, through service, through this commitment to making the world a more just place, a more peaceful place.
And as you keep learning about his life, about his work, we hope you'll find, some inspiration in his story, just like we have.
And maybe you'll even be inspired to find your own way, to contribute to the things that matter most to you. After all, as Jimmy Carter himself said, we must adjust to changing times and still hold to unchanging principles.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.